Thank you so much for the introduction. As mentioned, I am an MA student. This is my second year, and my background is political studies, so it has been a bit of a journey to become a historian. I don't think I'm a historian yet, so I'll use that in scary quotes. But my working thesis title right now is Reversing the Gaze, Voices of the African Diaspora on Europe and European Affairs between 1933 and 1937. Don't try too hard to think about how that connects to my experience. It really doesn't directly correlate to the experience I had there. I would say this is more in line with my training as my undergraduate degree in political science. This had more to do with that than anything else. So in June, as mentioned, I did travel to Tanzania. And this is a program that I want to mention, I actually have to mention, that was financed by the CIDA. And it was also managed by I have it written right here, the Association of Universities and Colleges Canada. So that's a requirement, I need to tell you that. So I was quite fortunate to be able to do this, and I want to make that clear throughout this presentation. I do, however, have to make a disclaimer. If you came to hear a professional talk about NGOs, I'm not that. I'm not a trained expert in NGOs, so I apologize. I'm also not a trained specialist on Tanzania. So what I say is just strictly based on my 3 months there. It is based on the coursework I did for a course that Dr. Marshall and Dr. Bennett helped me design and work on called The Dilemmas of International Development and Aid. And lastly, it's based on a little bit of the research I initially did for my master's on an NGO called Partners in Health, which was based in Boston and works in Haiti, most notably. Dr. Paul Farmer is one of its co-founders. And now it's in countries across the world, Peru, Russia, Malawi, Rwanda. And so I was familiar with this NGO before going, and actually in this beautiful binder here, which I brought with me, it was kind of my Bible when I went, I have lots of articles about Partners in Health, because it was really the guide for me when I went there, because I believe strongly in an organization and had it in mind. So that is what this talk is based on. So just to be fair, I thought I should tell you that right off the bat. Now I'd like to introduce you to Peace Mituna School and Orphanage. Now, the picture you see is, that's the volunteer house where we stayed, Christina and I, we slept with. Kaya's kids actually, well, I should tell you first, it's founded by Inabwe Kaya and his now ex-wife, Joyce. It was started in 2000, but I think the first orphans moved in to Kaya's house. This is actually Kaya's old home. Moved in there in 2005, and he had actually let 5 orphans move into his house, which Kaya, now I think he's 31 years old. Pretty awesome thing to do, to be honest with you. Think of a young man letting orphans move into his home is pretty generous. And so, yeah, so that's the house that used to be his. He subsequently now has moved into a different home, which is just literally across the grass from there, and you can see it. And so he doesn't live there anymore, but that is now the volunteer house. Now, Kaya actually has a very privileged position in the community. He's actually the grandson of a former, the last Meru tribal chief before independence in 1961. And what that means for Kaya now actually is quite interesting. I was told, and by others that live in the community, that if there's ever a conflict in the area, it actually goes to Kaya to be resolved. And so it's kind of an informal way that they do things, so Kaya still has a position of leadership. Did that influence him creating the school and orphanage? I'm not sure. I do think it probably attributes to his goodwill and the sense of leadership that he has. But it's certainly something I thought was very interesting. Now, the sources of funding, there's obviously lots of expenditures when you have an orphanage and a school, and so it's harder to bring in money. And so what Kaya has done to finance this is that he has his own tour company. Kaya is a safari guide, speaks great English, and so he has Matunda Cultural Tourism and Safaris. Matunda actually means in Swahili fruit, but it's also Kaya's family name. So often when I was in the community, I'd be like, oh, I'm at Peace Mituna, and people would say peace fruit. I was like, no, it's his family name. And so that's the translation, but it's actually Kaya's family name is Matunda. So he relies on his safari company to bring in money. Aside from that, he relies on donations, so goodwill of people like you. And also, he relies on volunteer fees, and so room and board fees. It fluctuates in terms of what time you go in the year. There's a high season, which is usually the summer, you pay more money. And then there's a low season, which is pretty much now in the winter. It also fluctuates. The longer you stay, the cheaper your room and board fees are. And so it depends on how much money you pay changes. I think I paid $1,800 US dollars to be there for 3 months, which is pretty cheap when you consider that I was getting food and everything paid for. The biggest sponsor that they have is actually, and the only sponsor that I think is consistent, is Sicily Foundation, which is sponsored, it's a United Kingdom, I think it's the United Kingdom And they started, I think they met, two people, Steve and Maureen Clifton, came in 2008 to climb Kilimanjaro and met Kaya that way, visited the project and really were fans of it. And so through their charity, they've now sponsored Peace Mituna, and they do give a monthly donation. Aside from that, the money is quite precarious. It just depends on what comes in. So volunteer fees, our fees are actually really important to have volunteers come because it helps with the expenditures. So, but the only guaranteed fee is actually, the culture is Peace Mituna, actually his business is the only thing that really brings in income. So it is a precariously financed project, which is important to consider for reasons I'll mention later on. This here is the Peace Mituna school. So this is actually all Kaya's property. It's a compounded area, there's a gate that goes all the way around it, and this is all on the same location. So it is a primary school, and it's an English school, which is very important. Most of the schools in the area are actually non-English or in Swahili primary school, and they switch over to English in secondary school. So primary runs from kindergarten to standard 7. At this school, actually we have a baby class, which was at the very beginning. You saw a picture of me, a bunch of children. That was a baby class. It's younger than kindergarten, so they're quite little people. The school has an enrollment of 163 students, and that ranges right now from baby class to standard 4. Currently, Peace Mituna is constructing its final 3 classrooms for standard 5, 6, and 7, and once that finishes, the school will be complete. Everything's going to be finished in time for the students who are now in standard 4 to move up. So they'll just move up and then eventually the school will be completed in time for them to have that done. It's also important to mention that the school is under a process right now of receiving official school status. So what that means is the school currently isn't registered as a school with the Tanzanian government. The project is registered as a non-profit and non-governmental organization with Tanzania, but it's not registered as a school. Now you might be thinking that is a big omission, not to do as a project, but it's kind of a it's a convoluted but also difficult process to actually wade through. Some paperwork that was mentioned to me from the volunteer coordinator was that you have to actually build a school first and then register, and then some other government official says, no, you have to register and then build your school. So the government's kind of changed its tunes. So Peace Mituna right now is going through a very long process of trying to register as a school. A complication from this, though, is that currently the school is not certified to administer exams. It has to administer national exams in standard 4 and standard 7. And right now, the school cannot do that. It has to take its students to another facility. Why that's difficult is because you also have to pay for these things, right? Because other schools do not want to let your students write for free, particularly because those students' marks reflect on its own school's performance. And so, not knowing Peace Mituna, they're a little hesitant to do this. So it's quite a bit of a wrinkle in terms of Peace Mituna's future development. They want to get this taken care of to, I think, save some money. So it is an important process to get registered with the government. Here is Peace Mituna's orphanage. It's actually called the Amani House, and I think it was built in 2010. What happened was the Sisi Foundation, which does a lot of work, I said, with this NGO, had arranged a climb on Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money, and they did. And they raised enough money to build this building that you see here. So it's actually quite new and very nice inside, and volunteers painted everything that you see there. So it's very much the work of goodwill. The Amani House, as you see there, it means peace in Swahili. And currently there's 23 children that live in the house, so it's full. There's a wait list of 20 children. The thing about the wait list is that you can't get kids into Peace Mituna until you graduate others. And so it's at least about 3 years away of taking any new children in. So the wait list is long, but unfortunately there's just not room to have any more children in there. It's also important to mention when we use the word orphan, it doesn't mean that these children do not have parents or caregivers. They might not have parents. Actually, no children right now at Peace Mituna do not have parents. There was 2 girls that we originally thought were without parents, and they stayed there during vacation. But eventually, actually, when I was there, it was a neat moment, was all of a sudden a mom appeared that we didn't know that was alive, actually. And so there was a bit of a ceremony that was had. So it was actually a very neat experience to take in, but it was also very interesting because we had thought the mother was dead and had recorded that information that she was dead. So it was quite the emotional experience, I would say, to have a mother come back from the dead, almost, and to have an experience like that. But mostly in cases, what happens is the caregiver isn't able to take care of the child, and so at that point, they termed an orphan. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the parents are not alive. Now, the school is located in a rural area of Tanzania, the village of Kamundu. And now, this is actually on Mount Meru, which is about 30 minutes, I would say, outside of Arusha, which is in northern Tanzania, and it's kind of a tourist hotspot. It's where you go for safaris. If you want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, that's where you leave from. Kamunda, as you can see, is lush. Because of its elevation, it gets a lot of rainfall. So you do grow things there. And a big part of that is that what happens as consequence is the people that live there are mostly subsistence farmers. They eat what they grow, and they live off what they grow. And so that's pretty much what happens there. There is an informal economy there. So if you do have a surplus, you do sell it. Market days, there's a market called Tangeru, which is about 30 minutes. Oh, about 30-minute walk, is that fair? You walk fast, 30 minutes, down from Peace Mituna into an area called Tangeru. It's another village. And on Wednesdays and Saturdays, that's market day. And so often on those days, you would see people with bananas on their head, sacks of potatoes, things that are very heavy, walking down to sell whatever they have. And again, it's very informal. Perhaps some days you'll work and you'll just trade, and your labor will be given for something back. So it's a very neat community sense, but it's, again, it's subsistence farmers, so there's not a lot of wealth. And whatever money that goes around is just kind of recycled in that area. I will say that I tried to carry bananas on my head down one day, and it was a mistake. The women that do it are young, and some of them are actually very old, and I couldn't do it. Actually, I had to get help getting it off my head, and I had some neck problems after, and it was a bit of a mistake, actually. So I have admiration. But it is a hilly area. Like I said, you're on a mountain, and so anywhere you're going, it takes effort, a lot of effort, actually. And so it was, I very admired the people that lived there because it took a lot of physical toll to do anything. And so it's their lifestyle, but I think any kind of walk is grueling, I found, anyways. So I'll talk to you more about that as we go on. Now, there are government schools in the area. The thing about government schools is that they are free for primary school. So I said primary goes from kindergarten to standard 7. But you do have to pay for a school uniform, and often that cost is enough to keep you out of school. So it's kind of a weird thing that happens. So a lot of students that we had, could have went to school at somewhere else, but unfortunately the school uniform thing is a bit of a problem, so they couldn't go. Also, the thing about government schools is that they are known for large classrooms. Now, when I say large classrooms, I'm talking about 80 students to 200 in one classroom for one teacher. And so you can imagine at a youth level, that's pretty hard. I mean, these are young kids, they're hard to control. And to have that kind of classroom number, you're not getting a lot of teacher time. And so the education isn't great. Another problem is teacher absenteeism. They're not around a lot. A lot of teachers just won't show. So even if you do have a class and it's scheduled, I mean, you show up and your teacher might not show up. So that is one of the problems with the government schools. So they are there, it's just not ideal. Oops, I don't know what's happening. The next stage of schooling for students, so you do primary school, which is K to standard 7, and then there's secondary school. Now that is Form 1 to Form 6 it follows. I think it's the British model of education. Secondary school, and then from then you do tertiary education, which is university. Secondary school, I will mention, is expensive. It does have school fees, so there's quite a cost involved with it. You also have to buy a new uniform for each form. So the uniform that you had in Form 1 will not get you through school. You have to keep moving through different colors and whatnot. So it gets very expensive for the local people to pay for. Now, I got to talk a little bit about why I chose Peace Mituna. Now, Dr. Marshall kind of mentioned this was quite a quick process, and that's true. I applied the same week that I heard about this, and the deadline, I think, was Friday, and I heard about it on a Tuesday, so it was a quick process. But I quickly, in hearing about this, there was 2 options. One of them was Barbados, to work with UNICEF, which I think most people have heard of UNICEF. Another one was Africa, and to work with Peace Mituna. And so I went on their website, and I came across their mission statement. Now, I told you earlier that I read about an organization called Partners in Health, and what I loved about Partners in Health was that they came at things with multiple ways, multi-pronged approach to things, and I'll explain. Partners in Health, it delivers healthcare in resource-poor communities. So they go into poor areas and they deliver healthcare. Usually deal with things like tuberculosis or AIDS. But what they have, a famous quotation is, to give someone TB medication but not give them food, it's like to wash your hands and dry it in the dirt. So it wasn't really helping these people. So you had to come at a different approach. You had to give them food. And so Partners in Health, which I really love and admire, they would not only heal people or work to give them cure or provide medications, but they'd also help their housing, provide clean water, food, employment, and so they came at it in a multifaceted approach. When I read this, I was very impressed by this mission statement because of, as it mentions the word, holistic. I thought that that's the same approach, right? That it was going to support students mentally, spiritually, physically, and socially. I was like, this is great, and this is something I believe in, right? These children need to be supported in all areas of their life, and so that is really why when I read that, I was like, I'm in, I want to go to Africa because this organization sounds great, and I loved what was written here. In terms of the placement details, this is what the placement said. Interns are asked to contribute to the education, health, and development of underprivileged children, both in the school and orphanage. I have experience working with children. As a hockey school instructor, my background is I played hockey. And so I felt very comfortable with working with small children. I thought this was great. And so like I said, I believed in the organization's mission very strongly. And I thought, when I read this, I thought, well, I can make a contribution in this area. And the big point I wanted you to focus on, and I'll come back to it, was are asked to contribute. I really did go to Peace Mituna with the expectation that I had something to contribute. I didn't think that I was going to solve every problem that was there. I wasn't that egotistical, but I definitely did believe that I would make some substantive contribution before leaving. Challenges. So, I went off to Peace Mituna, and there's challenges that you face when you just go. I mean, you're going to a different continent and a different country, which is just different. We went to a rural community, and so there's the silly challenges, I'll call them silly, but no power. So there was power at Peace Mituna, and the actual compound that we were on is very spoiled. We had running water, we had power, internet hookup, we had a washing machine which didn't work, so we did wash our clothes by hand, but I mean, it was quite spoiled. But you quickly learn that the occasional power cut is actually a daily affair, so usually you might not have had power in the day, but you'll get it at night. But then all of a sudden power started going off for 2 or 3 days in a row, which had other implications, because then our water pump wouldn't work, and so then we wouldn't have running water, which, again, these are things that people in the community that we are in don't have running water. So to complain about such a thing would be quite silly. So you get used to it, and it's amazing how you quickly adapt to such things. Quickly you learn that power isn't the most important thing in the world, and you also get used to not having running water. So things like that are relatively easy to deal with. Other challenges like passports. When I was there originally, you had to pay $150 US for a volunteer visa. When I gave in my passport, it was held and said that no, it's been raised to $550 US, which I didn't have. And then also that I needed to provide my school transcripts and a resume. Now, I had not been told this, and so of course they had my passport at this point, so it got me a little nervous. And I had phoned my embassy to say, hello, hi, this is what I'm being told. I'm a little concerned here. And they actually told me, no, you have to do these things. That was told to you, and your organization should have told you that before leaving. So it was the responsibility of Peace Mituna to inform me. So of course I'm sweating bullets, thinking that I'm not coming home, because I didn't get my passport back. It worked out because I had gone in June. I didn't have to. Luckily, the gentleman, Marcel, I think the wheel was probably greased a little bit in terms of him getting some money, and it worked out that I got my passport back. But from then on, it has been raised, and so now volunteer visa has $550, which has impacted Peace Mituna quite considerably, because that's a lot of money. And so if you're going to volunteer for a week, as people sometimes like to do, they want to come and volunteer for a week, $550 is a lot of money to pay, and so it was quite a blow to Peace Mituna. So that was another challenge that you face there, but that comes with going to a different country, right? The challenges I want to speak to you about are more in terms of the internship itself. The first one here is communication. By that, quite literally, I didn't speak Swahili, and so, which is fine because it was an English school, and I was trying to teach English, so that was okay, except it made it difficult when trying to communicate with children, right? The children at the orphanage speak pretty good English. They are used to having volunteers at the volunteer house around them all the day. So quite frankly, they're a little spoiled. They know English. They're kind of cocky about it too. They're adorable, but they're cocky because they're exposed to English. When there's power, they also have television and they have some DVDs. So they know Harry Potter. Sometimes they have to watch it in Spanish because somebody will donate a Spanish DVD. But nonetheless, they are in it and they know English quite well. And you can communicate with them. But the children, the 140 that come from the community to speak with you, aren't so good in English. And so sometimes it's difficult when you want to ask a child, what's wrong, or how are you, and you just know it's not registering because they don't understand English, right? And so you really wish you could speak the Swahili with them so you can have that communication and that connection. And so sometimes that was difficult. I also learned, and it took me a while to learn this, a little dense, but often even with the children in Amani House, who I thought spoke very good English, I would say something to them and they just kind of nod and smile, and I was like, these kids are so shy. Just shy, cute little kid. Well, actually, they just didn't understand me, is what I learned. It took me a while, probably like a month to figure out. I don't think he knew what I was asking him. So it took me a while, but I got there. And so you learn that. And so it's limiting because you want to express yourself and you want to hear answers back, right? You want to talk to these children, you want to hear about their experiences, but you can't do that. And so that's one of the things you kind of learn to deal with. But it can be isolating at times. Now, also communication, I'm going to talk about in a more general terms, which is getting everybody on the same page. And that was one of the difficulties that came with being at Peace Mituna. I can give you an example, but so we have a school, and you have the volunteers, right? And the thing is that you don't really talk to each other, which is really important, right? So maybe you have a bunch of volunteers, and you want to do something with the school. You need to have a bit of a communication there. And I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to kind of illustrate my point in talking about getting people on the same page. The Sicily Foundation, again, a huge contributor to Peace Mituna and do a lot to help them, had donated a massive blue metal bin. It's kind of like a bin that you put on a semi-truck. It was very large, and they shipped this by sea on a boat, had it delivered. They had to get a crane to come in and drop it on Peace Mituna, and they had filled it. So people, I think they had it open for a while, and people could come and drop off things. While I was there, we opened it up to know it was a mess. It was full of boxes, and just books, a projector was in there, water bottles for the kids, and toys, and all these things that people thought, we'll give to these children. And it was very, very generous. But the bin had been there for a long time, and I'm not even sure when it was delivered. But it had been there to the point that things inside were moldy, and were left unkept. We had to throw things away. We had to go through toys and throw some away. And it was really disappointing was to learn that when we spoke to the staff of the school, who speak English, but again, there's a communication divide, we'd ask them, do you know about this bin and all these resources that are in here? Because unfortunately in the classes, a lot of books are ripped, or they needed some new stuff. And so there's this beautiful bin full of stuff in there. Do you guys know about it? And they had not known about it, even though it's this big blue bin that was on the property. And they'd never been inside. But speaking to Kaya about it, he had said, well, he had been inside, and he already thought the children at the Mani house had enough things. And so he didn't want to spoil them, so they just closed it up. And so it was kind of one of those miscommunications where it was, we had all these beautiful resources that we really wanted to use, and people had sent to be used, but because of just the way the decision-making process went and the communication, the headmaster or any of the teachers hadn't been inside. So it was kind of disappointing to hear that, but at the same time trying to organize it. So it did create an activity. We subsequently went and organized the bin, and I think there was some more stuff in it. We ended up giving away books to the children, which was nice. A lot of children don't own books, and so the fact that they got a book and a bookmark with their name on it meant a lot to them, and so that was an activity that we did. And Kai was very generous to let us do that, and let us give away the books. And I think when you were there, you guys made libraries, yeah?
I did just like a, kind of when we were little, like book in a bag, so I did after school with them, and so every week, like standards 2 to 4 could come and take a book, and they would get a new book every week, and we kind of did activities and like contests if we read the book.
Right.
When I was leaving, there was one room and someone had donated shelves, so the headmaster and the teachers were organizing it as a library. So I left it up to them because I felt like it was their own project. They were very excited. So hopefully when school starts in January, there'll be a proper library.
Right. So again, that's another thing, thank you for mentioning. The school does not have a library, and so it was important to use these books. And so I guess my point with this little, maybe interesting example is just to mention that there were resources that were meant to be given, and unfortunately just because the story didn't get around, they were really rotting in this bin. And so that's just a small example of kind of some of the things that took place. Now in terms of organizational support, it also comes into communication, but Peace Mituna has a high rollover of volunteers. One of the sources of funding, like I said, is the volunteer room and board fees. And I think a sense that in terms of, I saw a lot of volunteers while I was there. There was 14 at one point while I was there. And a lot of the common complaints, and unfortunately there was some complaints, wasn't that they didn't love the children. They loved the children and loved being in the community. But one of the complaints was, we think it's just about our donating our money, and once they have our money, they didn't really have activities for us. And so a lot of volunteers felt underutilized. And so that was a common theme that ran through the experience. And part of that goes back to communication. When you have new volunteers arriving, it takes a lot of work to organize, what are you going to get these volunteers to actually do more activities. And so I think it's very difficult. Kaya faces very difficult financial pressures, right? He's got to keep this thing running. And so it made sense to me also that he really just cared about you paying your board fees, and then after that I don't think he was too concerned, because he had to keep his place operating. So once you're there, it wasn't so much important what you did, it was more important that you just paid your fees. And so it became more of a, I would say, a cultural hostel, right? Because you're in a rural Tanzania, so you're experiencing a local community. But in terms of actually having any formal activities for you, there wasn't a lot. While I was there, we had decided to pull the students. Originally, volunteers could go and teach in the classrooms. And while I was there, we had discussed that because it seemed to be quite a disruption to the class. Sometimes volunteers would jump around. They want to teach one class one day and another class the next day. Which, I mean, is very thoughtful. I mean, their English is great, and so obviously it's like, well, you have somebody who knows English very well, it makes sense. But you have to start thinking about it in terms of the students. They always had different teachers, and often the students kind of knew how to play it, right? They knew they could ask a volunteer who wasn't there for very long for things they knew they couldn't ask a Tanzanian teacher. Secondly, Peace Mituna pays teachers, Tanzanian teachers, to teach. So it's important to have those teachers do their job, right? And they are paid, and also to pay Tanzanians to teach. I think it's just generally nice to having volunteers fly in and do something for them that they can do for themselves. So that was another reason that we decided, like, you got to pull the volunteers out of there. They're a distraction. Also, we had an issue with some of the teachers not really having a lesson plan done. So they might say to you one morning, oh yeah, can you take my class this morning? And they'd sit in the staff room when you'd be teaching. And there'd be no lesson plan, so you just make up something. Which might have been better than nothing, but really, we like to have a schedule, right? You want to have a scheduled professional school, and you expect the teachers to know what they're teaching. So those were all things that all influenced the decision to pull the volunteers out of the school. But for volunteers, they didn't know that. So maybe they came to teach, and so some of them were pretty disappointed. Like, I came to teach, and I'm not teaching. And which is a very fair complaint. So what we had to try to do is organize an after-school program. But again, communication comes in here, because you have to organize with the teachers, right? Well, what can we get these students to work on? Or what are you working on in your class so we can build on it, right? So it created this whole dynamic that you need to have this dialogue. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get going. We couldn't get the headmaster organized to sit down with us and maybe say, we have 3 people coming from Australia next week. You know, do you think we could use them in your school, or and have that conversation? And unfortunately, because that conversation didn't happen, a lot of volunteers, I think, just enjoyed the sun when it was out and just hung out. And we're more of a babysitter role with the students, right? Playing games with them, but not making that substantive contribution that maybe they thought they were going for. I will blame volunteers, though, and even myself. When you go to rural Tanzania for a week and expect to light the world on fire, I think that's pretty difficult. So I do think there's also a problem there, thinking that only a week that you can really do a lot. So that's also a bit of a culture. But Tanzania does not put, Peace Mituna does not put a limit on, if you want to come for a day and experience Peace Mituna, they'll take your money and you're allowed to come. So really, it goes both ways, right? The organization does not set a minimum length for you to be there, which has implications. I'd also like to mention in terms of organizational support, they had one task for me when I was there. I had spoken to Kai and said, what would you like me to do? I had the statement up there in terms of my placement details, but it was a little vague. So I said, is there anything that you really want the interns to work on? And he had mentioned, Kaylee, who was a Carleton student who went before me, who was loved there. She had spent 2 months, and then I think came back for 8. Is that correct?
She extended her stay.
Yeah.
So
she's going back.
She's back there now. She's there now. Yeah. So she's loved there. She had started a school database, and by database I mean we have no information on the parents or anything in terms of where they live, their condition, any of that. And so Kaylee, good on her, decided to organize some of that and to figure out, to get contact information, stuff I think we take for granted, health information of the children, and also to do a home assessment to see the level of need, thinking that when money came in, or if we had resources, that we could streamline the delivery of these sources to who need them the most. And so they just said, we'd like you to finish that project, and that was it. I was like, okay. Besides that, they had no other work for me, but that's 3 months. And I was thinking, I have to walk children home, and that's my assignment for 3 months. Like, that's not a lot. So I kind of got on it, I tried to get on it, but another problem is I don't speak Tanzanian, so I needed a translator. And the woman that I was going to work with was a jack of all trades. She did every job at Peace Mituna. And so first she told me, we're not working on it right now. She said, pole, which means slowly, slowly. We ain't doing this right now. And so we didn't actually start this project until a month and a half in, almost 2 months. So I had 2 months of doing, really just kind of hanging out. And of course, that didn't mesh with my need to contribute, because I was there to contribute. And so I started working on a school lunch program. Kaylee had also worked on this, and came up with a price of $15,000 a year to feed the students at the school. The students only got porridge at the school, which you might be thinking, that's a lot. But frankly, the students get up in the morning, they have a chai, a cup of milk, tea in the morning, and then they walk an hour and a half, an hour to school. And I don't know if this picture showed, it's hilly and it's demanding. And so that isn't enough to cover it really for them. And so a school lunch is really, really important. Also the kids throughout the day get irritable. they're kids, they get hungry, they don't want to sit in the classroom. If I'm hungry, I don't want to learn anything either. And so they really got irritable in class. So the length of our school days was really cut short because we didn't have lunch. So it was very important that we had a program like this. So that was something that I had tried to work on. I had downloaded, when we had internet, a bunch of World Food Program models. And one of them was a homegrown school feeding program, which the beauty of this is that it uses the local food in the area to feed your school, right? So what happens is you make partnerships with the local farmers, and rather than have them walk to a market, they sell their food to you. So they get a stable, fixed price, which is really important actually, because when you're hauling bananas and potatoes down 45 minutes and you're trying to sell them all day and you don't sell them, you're not going to want to haul those things back up. So often you sell your food for a price that's not really worthy of what you have and what you've grown, right? So you get less money. So I thought, this is great. We'll help the community, we'll get money back into it, and we'll develop a program like this. Now when I did see Kaya and approached him about it, I think important in Kaya's defense, I think he sees a lot of volunteers with big ideas. I was probably like, yeah, okay. Well, but he said, yeah, we'll go and visit and talk to local farmers. Unfortunately, it was always kesho. Now kesho is Swahili for tomorrow. And so he said, yeah, kesho, we'll go and interview farmers. Kesho never happened. And so it was kind of, I learned the long way that we never went. And that was one of the, so I talk about organizational support, that was one of the frustrations, was that I thought this was kind of a priority of theirs, but we could never really get it going to go and organize and meet local farmers. Also, even looking at a budget, I couldn't ever get Kaya to show me a budget. Now, is it any of my business? Probably not. You can yell at me for that. But the idea was just to see if there was any way that we could do something differently, or even just to show other corporations when we ask for money to say, hey, this is where our money is going. It's not going somewhere it shouldn't be going, and we'd like to have a school lunch program. And so that's why I thought the budget was really important, but never got to see one. And so that was kind of a frustration of mine, was just that I really didn't feel there was a lot of support that way from the organization. The last point that was really challenging was a need to give, and I have to kind of explain this. We are in rural Tanzania, so we're not in Arusha. In Arusha, there's lots of volunteers, and of course people coming to tour the area, they denote money, right? So they're called, first of all, a white person or a stranger, I think in Tanzania is called Mzungu. And so you have to hear Mzungu, Mzungu, give me some money, or to kind of some money. And so that was something you heard a lot in Arusha. Now, where we were in Matunda, there's not a lot of Mzungus around. It is a rural area. Peace Mituna is known as the place where you do see Mzungus, but outside of us, you don't see a lot. So it was very interesting to walk in the community and be in areas where they probably haven't seen Mzungus, and how I know that is because the children would see you and scream and run up into their house, and so they'd be like, okay, probably haven't seen me, or especially a person 6 feet tall, no less, poor child. But anyways, but you'd see children who didn't know a lick of English, who would come up to you and say, give me my money. And you'd be like, who taught you that phrase, really? And this saying, I see Mzungu, ask for money, right? And a lot of times you feel like you want to, because you see where this child goes back to, and you see their home, and you know it would make a difference. And so it was very, very hard, because you felt like you wanted to give, but you also don't want to set that precedent or perpetuate further of Mzungus have money and just come give, and then give a handout mentality, right? And so it's a huge conflict. I know I gave away a lot of stuff when I was there. I shouldn't have, and I think it's bad. I brought a whole bag of toys with me now, and Peace Mituna doesn't say no, and so I came with a bag of toys and handed them out to the kids, which again created a really bad precedent for these children, because now every time a volunteer comes, where's my giftie? And that's what they'll say, where's my giftie? And it's not the children's fault, it's kind of been taught to them that way. But I never thought about it, and now I feel cheap. I think about it, I'm like, you're such an idiot, Brittany, like you just went and perpetuated this whole problem. But I didn't think about it. But now I do, I'm a bit more critical, thinking that maybe that wasn't the best idea, that I did that, and maybe I should have done that. And so there's that need to give, and I have paid, and I still pay school fees of 2 children. And one of them is now a friend of mine, Kranos, who came and said, I have no money for school fees. And he showed me his marks. And Kaya said, no, we don't have money for it. I'm sorry, I can't help you. And I got upset and was like in tears. But I've never asked. I've never had to ask people to go to school, especially high school. And so I got upset and paid his school fees. But it set up the whole idea of, again, am I helping, really? And another problem is, while they might think that I have a limited amount of money, because I am a Mzungu, and Mzungus to them denote money, I'm actually still a student, right? And so it's very difficult to explain to them, I want to help you, but I really can't, because I also have a budget. And a lot of the times, some people will be like, what? A budget? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you come from Canada, there's wealth there. And it's like, there is, but I don't have it. So it was difficult, but it's hard to explain that to people, right? And so that was really challenging, and I find emotionally draining, and also conflicted. I'm still conflicted about this need to, Christmas time was very, very hard. I'm getting gifts. I had asked my parents to give me money, and my dad was like, there's no way in hell, frankly, he's done giving you money. He's like, these are things that you need, we're not donating this money. And so it was really conflicting because I really felt bad because I still have these ties now. And I get text messages from people in Tanzania saying, no, my son's out of eye medication, which I paid for while I was there. But what was I doing? Because now the child doesn't have eye medication anymore because I'm gone. And I can't get money to them. But I get text messages, and sometimes I get emails. So it's a legacy of what happened, but it's very conflicting. And you don't know how best to contribute, right? Because you're there and you're in it, and you want to do something, but in terms of helping them in a couple of years in time, you can't guarantee anything, right? So you're not really doing anything in the long term. And so that was one of the huge, huge challenges. So those were my challenges as an intern, but I gotta say, like I kind of mentioned already, I really felt the need to contribute. And pretty much the school lunch program, the after school program, anything I worked on failed. I didn't accomplish anything. The school database I worked on, and I got to walk with the children home, I did that, but quite frankly, a Tanzanian could have done that, because what happened is I went to the translator who translated it to me and I wrote it down. They could have cut the middleman and just kept her and she could record it, so I didn't do anything, I was just there. Now I'm grateful because I got to experience it. I got to walk little children an hour and a half home on a dusty road, and I got to see where they live. I got to sit in their house and just meet with their parents, and after I asked my requisite question, I had them tell me more stories about themselves and their life and what they find challenging. And so it really was an amazing experience, and it led to this humbly, humbly lesson. It's not about you, and in this case, it wasn't about me. And it took me, it's 2 months. I was there for 3. 2 months to realize, holy Snickers, Brittany, it isn't about you. You think it's about you, and you need to contribute. And I thought I was going there with good intentions. I'm going to help, and I'm going to do something good. And it took me 2 months to realize, and I had phoned my mom every Saturday. She had phoned from Canada, paying a lot of money, to tell me, Brittany, you gotta calm down, just experience it, experience it. And I was like, no, Mom, like, I'm supposed to be doing something here. I'm gonna help, gotta do something. No, I didn't accomplish anything. But really, in my quest to contribute, was my need for self-efficacy, my own need to do something, to feel good about what I could do. And so it was about me, and I made it about me inadvertently. And so I learned that there, quite painfully, that I made this about me. And so walking the children home, the school database assignment, which I owe Kaylee so much for, was good for me, because when I was doing these walks, it was about the student. Sometimes I was really tired, I was really hot, and I was really dirty. And I knew when I got back I would not be showering. And so I was like, man, dust is everywhere, in places I didn't even know about, in fact. And here I am walking, and I'm hungry, even though this child hasn't eaten. And then all of a sudden they'd hold your hand, and you'd be like, okay, this is about this child, right? And then it really changed my perspective on things, because when you walk with these children, you see what they go through daily, right? So I'm not stuck in Peace Mituna, I'm out in the community. I'm seeing where he gets his water from. I'm seeing where he sleeps at night. I'm seeing that he has no power, or that he cooks in a stove inside of his house, like a wooden stove, that smoke he has to breathe in, or that he sleeps by kerosene lamp. You see these things, right? And so I was so blessed to have that experience of, it's about these children and doing what they need. And so that was my biggest lesson, was listening to, learning from, and working alongside those who wish to serve. Like, that is what we were there to do. And that was what I was there to do, but I was quite stubborn, and it took me a very long time to learn that lesson. So those are the things that I experienced, but I want to talk a little bit now about some of the challenges I think that Peace Mituna faces as a project. Now, I was taking a course that problematized NGOs, so I had a bit of a skewed view, perhaps, because I was reading these things and be like, wow, what I'm reading seems to match my situation. And so I will say, maybe that tainted my view a little bit. So, Rethinking Peace Mituna. Peace Mituna is a project born of goodwill. Kaya has redefined generosity for me. I mean, a man of 30 years old now, who is taking kids into his home and now has an orphanage on his property, who's trying to run a school, is amazing. He could easily just took in his money that he made from the safari company, a very well-paying job that he would have done fine with, and just paid students to go to school somewhere else. But instead, he's taken on this massive, massive headache of trying to run something like this. So what he's doing is amazing. I want to say that. But one of the things that I thought about was that I came across some of our readings that Dr. Marshall Bennett gave me, the very first reading, in fact. So you guys kind of ruined my trip, the first reading when I came across this. And it was the UNDP's definition of development. And it says, human development is a process of enlarging people's choices. So I read that, and because I had lots of time on my hands, I started thinking, if that's the definition of development, what is Peace Mitunda's contribution to development? Now, it's a primary school. It goes from K, right, to Standard 7. If you don't pass your Standard 7 exams, actually, in Tanzania, I should have mentioned this, you're not supposed to go on to secondary school. That's the end part, which is, I can imagine, again, I was probably still eating Play-Doh in grade 7 in elementary school, so the fact that my future would depend on an exam I wrote then would be pretty hard. But Peace Mituna ends at Standard 7. Well, secondary school is hard to pay for. If you didn't afford primary school, my question is, for these kids who definitely had no money to go to primary school, how are they going to afford secondary school? And at secondary school, these children need, if they want a well-paying job, or if they want to go to university, they need a secondary education. So this project is ending exactly where I think it really needs to get going, where these children really need the support, right? So even though we might do a great job of educating them and making them pass those tests, then what? Now the orphanage does have something called the Rethinking Fund, which is a sponsorship program for those 23 children that are in the orphanage. They have 4 different levels of sponsorship. The first 2 help out the student. The third and the fourth give you an option of, well, not option, but because you pay enough, some of that money goes into a fund for them so it pays for the secondary school when they get there. Some of the kids are already in grade 4, right, and who are not sponsored right now. In fact, none of the kids are funding. There's maybe 2 kids that are fully sponsored out of 23. And so there's a bit of a race right now to see if we can get these kids sponsored in time to create enough money in their savings accounts so we can pay for the secondary. Now that's for the 23 children in the orphanage. We have 140 others who I know cannot pay for this secondary school. So what next? They come from families that are subsistence farming, maybe business. When they say business, it's usually like selling maybe cell phone minutes or informal economy, right? They call that business, which it is for them. But the question I really have is, what are we going to do with these children? I mean, we need to do something for them to get them into secondary, because really we haven't enlarged their choices, right? They're not going to secondary school. That was always the case. So really, their options are still subsistence farming. That's the same option that they had before. It's the option they had going into school, and they're leaving our school with the same option. So I had some concerns about that. Being a big mouth, I should have mentioned that while I was there, because it didn't earn me a lot of friends. When I started asking them, what's going to happen to these students once we left? Because, you know, to be fair, I mean, people are stressed trying to keep that place running. The last thing they needed was hearing a punky girl come in from Canada for 3 months and saying, you know, what are you guys going to do when these kids graduate? Like, what's the plan here? But it was a serious concern of mine. Now, fortunately, we had met a girl, Jessica, doing home visits, who wanted to go to secondary school, and so we had paid her fees. And I got to go up to this place right here, Ndongo Secondary School, and actually Christina came with me, I think, once as well, so she's seen this place. Now, Ndongo School tells a story about Tanzania, which is very common. It was a US-backed school. Somebody thought, hey, let's go to school in Tanzania, we'll help you, we'll start up a school. And so they funded it, and then stopped funding it. And so the school now is struggling to stay going. And it's a secondary school. And so I went there with Jessica to pay for her school fees, and I had to meet the headmaster. Again, I think part of it being Mzungu, they wanted me to meet them and go through the exercise, because really I didn't think I really needed to do that. I could have gave her the money and she could have done it. Now I'm really grateful that I did, because I got to go and see the school, and I saw they had a boarding facility that's being underutilized because nobody can afford it. I was thinking, this is great. Here's an option. I think it was a half-an-hour walk. Hard half-an-hour walk. It was straight uphill. It's really hard. And it's very humbling when you get passed by an elderly woman who looks at you, it's like, and you're you know, dying. So I didn't really make the Zoomies look good walking there. But so it's a hard walk. But my point was, is here's a school that's struggling financially, and that has a boarding house already built into it, that has a teacher's house built, and has the school already built. The infrastructure was there. So I got really excited, because I was like, man, the school is struggling. We could help it, maybe, thinking idealistically, maybe we can get something going financially, where Sicily Foundation will talk, we can do something here. And it needs students, so I thought it was a really good partnership. Now I did mention it to Kaya, and he just said, they're not doing very good, it's not a very reputable school, which is true. I mean, yes, they had problems with teachers. But my point was the long-term vision, this would be a place that if we create these partnerships, I really felt that this is a place where our students could go. And the best part was, it's a half-an-hour away, so we can see the students still, right? Because you can still keep that relationship, right? The connection to students who are used to seeing you every day. We can still have that, but that's as far as it went. I mentioned it, and I now still talk to the school director, actually the academic advisor is my Facebook friend. And so he emails me once in a while, but now I get these emails of, we need help for money, and I don't know what to do, because it's like, I'm sorry, it was, you know, it's not my call, right? Because I really hope that we can get something going with Peace Mituna, and it doesn't seem to be the case. So, but that is an option that's there, I think, that I would like to explore if I worked there, but I don't, and it's not my organization, so that's another thing. It's not up to me. So I've kind of had that slide, but also dealing with the idea that ED would like me to contribute financially to his school. Now, the next part gets a little kind of funky. The students' well-being. You guys, I showed you the mission statement, which I was really impressed by, the holistic education, supporting students physically, emotionally, all these areas. Having admired that so much, it was very hard for me to be on school property and see students hit for not doing their jobs, or pinched, or hearing reports of students being kicked. Find volunteers coming back to the lunch table very upset because they'd seen that. And it's also very hard to see that, just for different reasons. It just makes people, I just had a problem with it in general. And the problem was that I had a big mouth again, so I would say things to the teachers like, why did you hit the student? Or I thought you weren't supposed to hit the students according to your mandate. Sicily Foundation said you can't hit your students, and they will say we don't hit our students. And so it was very difficult. And eventually I actually got told by the volunteer coordinator that people complained to Kaya that some of the volunteers were asking questions about corporal punishment. This one was doing it. And I probably should have been more respectful, and it was not my place.